A homeless veteran and his dog gave an old woman a home, and God returned the light. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin our story. It was a freezing winter evening, and the wind howled through the barren streets of a small town in northern Minnesota. The snowflakes danced in the air like ghosts, swirling and falling in a relentless storm. The town was quiet, eerily so, as most of the locals had hunkered down in their homes, avoiding the fierce storm that was sweeping through. But there was one man, a veteran named Thomas, who didn't have the luxury of a warm home to retreat to. Thomas had been homeless for years, ever since he returned from service. The years had not been kind to him, and the memories of the war still haunted him. His body bore the scars of battle, but it was his heart that was truly broken. With no family, no friends, he wandered from town to town, trying to make a living, but finding only despair. And by his side through it all was his loyal German shepherd. Max. Max was more than a dog. He was Thomas's only companion, his only source of comfort in a world that had turned its back on him. Together, they trudged through the snow, seeking shelter from the storm. They had found a few abandoned buildings over the years, but nothing ever felt like home. On this particular night, as they made their way down the empty street, something caught Thomas's eye. A dim light flickered in the distance, coming from a small cottage at the end of the road. It was the only building still lit, and despite the cold, Thomas felt an unexpected pull toward it. He guided Max toward the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. When they reached the front door, Thomas knocked hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. To his surprise, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman standing. In the doorway, she was frail, with silver hair and a face that carried the weight of many years. But her eyes were kind, and when she saw Thomas and Max, her expression softened. "Can I help you, son?" she asked, her voice gentle but weary. Thomas, struggling to find the words, simply nodded. I was hoping to find some shelter for the night," he stammered, glancing at Max, who was sitting loyally by his side. The woman looked down at Max, then back at Thomas, before stepping aside and gesturing for them to come in. "Of course," she said warmly. "You're both welcome to stay as long as you need." As Thomas stepped inside, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. The warmth from the fire in the hearth wrapped around him like a blanket, and for the first time in a long while, he felt safe. Little did he know, this small act of kindness would change everything. This woman, Evelyn, had no idea that her simple offer of shelter would spark a chain of events that would lead to miracles beyond anyone's imagination. The wind outside howled, but inside the small cottage, the fire crackled warmly, filling the room with its golden glow. Thomas sat by the hearth, his eyes closing for a moment as he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Max, his loyal German shepherd, lay at his feet, content and calm. Evelyn, the elderly woman who had opened her door to them, moved about the room, setting the table with simple but comforting food: fresh bread, warm soup, and a cup of tea. As the evening wore on, Evelyn shared stories of her own life, and Thomas listened, grateful for the companionship. She spoke of her late husband, a kind man who had passed away many years ago, and of the small farm they once had. Evelyn's voice, though weak with age, carried a warmth and sincerity that made Thomas feel more at home than he had in a long time. There was no judgment in her eyes, no pity, just kindness. Thomas had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a person, not just a homeless veteran. But here, in this small cottage, he felt like he mattered. As the night grew late, Evelyn insisted that Thomas and Max stay the night. "You're welcome. Here, as long as you need," she said softly. Thomas wanted to refuse, to avoid imposing, but something in her voice made him stay. After all, what harm could there be in one night of rest? The next morning, the storm outside had finally subsided. The sun peeked through the clouds, casting a soft light over the snowy landscape. As Thomas stepped outside to stretch his legs, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in years. The world seemed a little brighter, a little less cold. Inside, Evelyn was already preparing breakfast, her hands moving with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Max, ever the vigilant companion, sat by the door, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. But for once, there was no danger. There was just warmth, just safety. After breakfast, Evelyn asked Thomas to help with a few small tasks around the house. The roof had a few leaks from the storm, and the garden out back needed tending to. It wasn't much, but for Thomas, it felt like he was finally doing something worthwhile. The simple act of helping, of working with his hands, gave him a sense of purpose he had long lost. As he worked in the garden, he found himself thinking back to the days when he had a family of his own, before the war took everything away. He had once tended to his own garden, had once been a part of something larger than himself. But those days felt like a distant memory now, like a lifetime ago. As the day went on, Thomas and Max began to feel more at home in the cottage. Evelyn seemed to have a way of making even the most mundane tasks feel meaningful. She didn't ask for much, just companionship and a helping hand. And in return, she offered them something that had been missing from Thomas's life for far too long: human connection. That afternoon, as Thomas was fixing a small leak in the roof, Evelyn came up behind him, holding something in her hand. It was an old, weathered key, its brass surface worn smooth by years of use. "This," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "was my husband's. He always told me it was for someone special, someone who would know what to do with it when the time came." Thomas took the key, examining it carefully. It didn't look like much, just an old, ordinary key. But something about it felt important. "What is it for?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Evelyn smiled softly, her eyes distant. "I don't know," she said, "but I think it's time for you to find out." That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, Thomas stood in front of the small chest that Evelyn had pointed to earlier. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and with a turn, the chest creaked open. Inside, there was something unexpected, a stack of old papers, yellowed with age. As Thomas carefully sifted through them, he realized that they were deeds to the land Evelyn had once owned, a piece of property that had been in her family for generations. And with the papers was a note, written by Evelyn's late husband, explaining that the land was now hers to give away as she saw fit. Thomas stared at the papers, his heart racing. He didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was certain: this was no ordinary gift. It was a legacy, a treasure left behind, waiting to be uncovered. And somehow, Thomas knew that this was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. The following days brought an air of calm and purpose to the small cottage where Thomas and Max had found refuge. The storm had passed, and though the world outside was still blanketed in snow, inside Evelyn's home, warmth filled the air. Thomas had stayed, not just out of necessity, but because he had started to feel something he hadn't in years: hope. Hope was a foreign concept to him, especially after the war, but here, with Evelyn and Max, it was beginning to stir in his chest. It wasn't much, just small moments: a smile, a shared meal, a quiet afternoon spent repairing the roof together. But it was enough to make him believe, just for a moment, that perhaps he wasn't as lost as he thought. Evelyn had been kind, but there was something more to her than just kindness. She was strong, resilient, and wise in ways that went beyond her years. As Thomas worked alongside her, fixing what needed to be done around the house, he started to notice small things. There was the way she moved through the house with purpose, as if every step she took mattered. The way she cared for her home, for Max, and for him, despite everything she had endured in her life. And then there was the key, that old, brass key. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a simple object. Evelyn had said it was meant for someone special, and when she had handed it to him, it felt like a turning point. He had no idea what it opened, but it was as if the key was unlocking something inside him as well: memories, dreams, and a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. One evening, after a long day of work, Evelyn invited Thomas to sit with her in front of the fire. Max lay at their feet, his head resting comfortably on the rug. Evelyn poured 2 cups of tea, the steam rising from them in delicate swirls, and handed one to Thomas. As they sat together, the fire crackling in the background, Evelyn spoke again about her past, this time in more detail. She told him about her late husband, Arthur, and how they had once dreamed of building something meaningful: a family, a life, a legacy. But those dreams had been shattered when Arthur passed away, and Evelyn had been left to navigate life alone. "It's funny," she said, her voice soft but steady, "how life can change in an instant. One moment, you think you have everything, and the next, it's all gone." Thomas nodded, understanding her words in ways he never thought he could. He had lived through that same kind of loss, losing his comrades, his family, and, most painfully, himself. He had spent years trying to find a reason to keep going, a reason to believe that the world still had something good to offer. But in Evelyn's company, he was starting to see that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for him. The next day, Evelyn took Thomas to the back of the property, where the land stretched out before them in the early morning light. There, hidden behind overgrown trees and thick brush, was a small shed. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time, but Evelyn led him toward it, her eyes twinkling with a secret. She handed him the old key and said, "It's time you see what's inside." Thomas hesitated for a moment, but then, with a deep breath, he turned the key in the lock. The shed creaked open, and inside, there was a treasure that took Thomas completely by surprise. Stacked in the corners were old boxes, crates, and pieces of furniture, some covered in dusty sheets, others showing signs of wear. But the most surprising thing of all was the large chest sitting in the far corner, covered in cobwebs, but unmistakably valuable. Thomas approached it slowly, as if he were afraid it might disappear. The chest was old, its wood darkened with age, but it was sturdy, and the lock was still intact. With shaking hands, Thomas inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The chest opened with a soft creak, revealing what lay inside: documents, photographs, and letters. It was a family's history, a story of love, loss, and resilience. As Thomas carefully sifted through the papers, he realized that Evelyn's late husband had left behind not just memories, but something more. There were deeds to land, legal documents, and old letters that spoke of a family fortune, a legacy that had been passed down through generations. It was a treasure far beyond what Thomas had imagined. He could hardly believe his eyes. This was no ordinary inheritance. It was a new life. The discovery of the chest was the first step, but Thomas knew there was much more to uncover. With Evelyn's guidance, he began to piece together the story of her family's past, and the more he learned, the more he realized how intertwined their fates had become. They weren't just sharing a house. They were sharing a history, a future. As Thomas closed the chest and stood up, he looked at Evelyn, who had been watching him with a mixture of anticipation and hope in her eyes. "I never expected this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Evelyn smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Neither did I, Thomas. But sometimes, life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." Thomas knew in that moment that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand, but one thing was certain: he was no longer alone. And for the first time in years, he believed that maybe, just maybe, things would finally be okay. The discovery of the chest and the old family documents was just the beginning. As the days passed, Thomas and Evelyn pored over the papers, trying to piece together the puzzle of Evelyn's family history. The letters and deeds were more than just old papers. They were a roadmap to something greater, a legacy that had been left behind, forgotten by time. Evelyn had no idea that her husband had kept all of this hidden, nor did she understand the significance of the land and property they owned. For years, she had lived in quiet solitude, unaware of the treasure she held in her hands. As they uncovered more, it became clear that this inheritance was not just about money or land. It was about restoring a piece of history, reconnecting with a past that had been lost. Thomas found himself becoming more and more involved in the project. What started as a simple favor to help Evelyn now felt like something much bigger, something that gave him purpose. He had spent years feeling lost, drifting from one place to another, searching for a reason to keep going. But now, in this small cottage, he found a reason. He found a family history that needed to be preserved. He found a home, not just for him and Max, but for Evelyn as well. Evelyn, in turn, began to see Thomas in a new light. She had come to depend on him in ways she hadn't expected. His strength, his work ethic, and his quiet determination had become a steady source of support. She no longer saw herself as just an old woman clinging to memories of the past. Instead, She saw someone who still had a purpose, someone who could restore what had been lost. As they continued working together, the bond between them grew stronger. There were long days spent repairing the house, clearing the land, and learning about the family's past. Each step brought them closer to the realization that this inheritance was meant to be shared, not kept hidden. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Evelyn sat down with Thomas and Max by the fire. She had a look in her eyes, one that Thomas recognized. She was about to say something important. "Thomas," she began, her voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've found, and I think it's time we do something with it." Thomas looked up from the fire, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Evelyn smiled, a knowing smile that seemed to come from a place deep inside her. "I mean, we can't keep all of this to ourselves. We need to share it. This land, these stories, this legacy, it's meant for more than just us. It's time we give it back to the community." Thomas was taken aback. He hadn't thought about it like that before. He had been so focused on the discovery, on the history they were uncovering, that he hadn't considered what it meant for others. "You mean, share it with the people in town?" he asked. Evelyn nodded. "Yes. This property was always meant to be a place of refuge, a sanctuary. We can make it a place where others can come and find the peace we've found. It's time we give back to those who need it most." The idea took root in Thomas's heart. He had seen so much suffering in his life. He knew what it was like to feel lost and alone. And now, with this gift, he had the chance to help others in a way he never thought possible. Together, Evelyn and Thomas began to plan. They would open up the land to the community, creating a safe space for people to come and heal, to find solace in nature and in each other. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be obstacles to overcome, and it would take time. But they were both committed to the idea. For the first time in years, Thomas felt a sense of purpose that went beyond just surviving. He was building something meaningful, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. One day, as they worked in the garden together, Evelyn turned to Thomas and said, "I never thought I'd find someone like you, Thomas. You've brought light back into my life in ways I didn't know were possible." Thomas smiled, his heart full. "It's not just me, Evelyn. It's all of us. Max, you, me, we're all part of this. We're building something beautiful together." As they stood side by side, looking out at the land they were about to transform, Thomas knew that he had finally found his place in the world. He had a purpose now, a family to care for, and a future to build. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and change for Thomas, Evelyn, and Max. With the discovery of the family legacy, the two of them had embarked on a mission to transform the land into a sanctuary for the community. They worked together tirelessly, clearing the overgrown garden, fixing up the old barn, and making plans for what they would build. As time passed, more and more people from the town began to take notice. Some came out of curiosity, others out of necessity. Word had spread that a piece of land had been restored, and there was hope that it could offer a fresh start for those who needed it most. Evelyn and Thomas welcomed each new face with warmth and kindness. It wasn't long before the community began to gather around them. It was a small town, but it was a town with a big heart. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the town was coming alive again. People began to pitch in, helping with the restoration efforts, offering their time and skills to make the land a place of refuge. There were families who had struggled with loss, young people who had nowhere to go, and elderly individuals who had been isolated for far too long. Evelyn and Thomas knew that this project was bigger than themselves. They were creating a space where people could heal, where they could rebuild their lives just as Thomas and Evelyn had. It wasn't just about the land, it was about the people. And with each passing day, more lives were touched. Thomas found himself busier than he had ever been. The quiet, lonely days he had once known were now replaced with bustling activity. There were tasks to be done, plans to be made, and people to care for. But for the first time in his life, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a calling. As he worked alongside the community, he realized that the work wasn't just about fixing the land. It was about fixing his own heart. For so long, he had carried the weight of guilt and regret, never feeling like he deserved a second chance. But now, surrounded by people who cared, he began to see that maybe he was worthy of a fresh start. And it wasn't just the work that was healing him, it was the relationships he was forming. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas found that he wasn't alone anymore. He had a family in Evelyn, in Max, and in the people who had come to support them. Slowly, the farm began to take shape. The old barn was transformed into a community center, a place where people could come together for meals, meetings, and support. The garden flourished, and a small orchard began to grow. There was laughter in the air, the sound of children playing, and the joy of new beginnings. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a soft shade of orange, Evelyn and Thomas sat together on the porch, looking out over the land they had restored. Max lay at their feet, content and relaxed. For a moment, there was nothing but the peaceful silence of the evening. "You've done more for this place than anyone could have ever imagined," Evelyn said, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've brought this farm back to life, Thomas. And you've brought hope to so many people." Thomas smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you, Evelyn. This place, this land, it was always meant to be something special. I just needed to be here to see it." Evelyn reached over and took his hand. "I think we've both found what we were looking for," she said quietly. And in that moment, Thomas realized she was right. He had found a home, a purpose, and a family. It wasn't just the land that had been restored, it was his spirit. The next day, as the sun rose over the land, Thomas stood at the edge of the orchard, watching the people who had come to work alongside him. They were tending to the trees, working together, just as they had worked to rebuild the farm. And for the first time in a long time, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. He had been given a second chance, not just to heal himself, but to help others heal as well. As he looked out over the land that had once been a place of solitude and decay, he now saw a thriving community, a place where people could find new hope. And in that moment, Thomas knew that this was only the beginning. There was still much work to be done, but they were on the right path. With Evelyn, Max, and the community by his side, Thomas had found his place in the world. And together, they would continue to build something beautiful, a place where hope could grow, just like the trees in the orchard, reaching toward the sky. As the weeks passed, the small farm began to take on a life of its own. The community was stronger than ever, with new faces joining in, offering their help, and contributing to the restoration of the land. Thomas, Evelyn, and Max worked side by side with the people who had once been strangers, but now felt like family. Together, they transformed the farm into a sanctuary that was not only a place of healing, but a symbol of hope for everyone involved. The barn was now a community center, filled with laughter and conversations. Families came together for meals, shared stories, and supported one another. The garden flourished, and Evelyn's once-forgotten orchard began to produce fruit, offering a bountiful harvest. The land had truly come alive, just like the people who had returned to it. But amid all the progress, there was still something nagging at Thomas. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the family's legacy than they had uncovered so far. Despite the joy he felt working alongside Evelyn and the others, a sense of curiosity lingered in his mind. The key, the chest, the papers, it all felt like the beginning of something much larger than just restoring a farm. One morning, after finishing his chores, Thomas decided to go back to the shed where they had found the chest. Something inside him urged him to take another look, to dig a little deeper. Maybe there was something he had missed before. As he walked through the tall grass toward the shed, Max by his side, Thomas felt a strange sense of anticipation. The shed seemed quieter than usual, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for him to return. When he entered, the familiar smell of old wood and dust filled the air. He approached the chest again, his heart racing with the thought that there might be something more hidden inside. He carefully opened the chest, the old hinges creaking as it revealed its contents. This time, instead of the papers and letters, there was a small box, tucked away in the corner. It was made of polished wood, intricate carvings decorating its surface. As Thomas held it in his hands, he felt a sense of wonder, as if the box had been waiting for him all along. The lock was simple, but the key from the chest fit perfectly. With a turn, the box opened, and inside, Thomas found something that took his breath away. It was a letter, written in the same elegant handwriting as the documents they had found earlier. But this letter was different. It wasn't addressed to Evelyn or her husband. It was addressed to Thomas. To the one who has come to restore what was lost, the letter began. This land was never just meant to be a farm. It was always meant to be a home for those who had no place else to go. It was meant to heal the wounded, to restore the broken, and to offer hope to those who had none. You, Thomas, are the one who was chosen to complete the legacy we started. You and your dog, Max, have shown the strength and courage it takes to restore not just a farm, but a community. You have given hope to those who needed it most, and now it is time for you to take the next step. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he read the letter. The words felt like a call to action, a challenge to continue the work he had started. It was as if Evelyn and her late husband had known all along that Thomas was the key to something bigger, something more profound than he could have ever imagined. The letter went on to explain that the farm was more than just land. It was a place of refuge, a sanctuary for those who had lost their way. It was meant to be a home for the broken, the lost, and the forgotten. And now, it was up to Thomas to make that vision a reality. You have restored this place, the letter concluded, but there is still much work to be done. There are more people who need this place, more souls who need healing. The legacy is yours now. It is up to you to carry it forward. Thomas sat in stunned silence, holding the letter in his hands. The weight of it all settled over him, but so did a sense of peace. He had been chosen for something. He had been part of something much larger than himself, and he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He wasn't just building a farm or a community. He was building a home. As the days turned into weeks, Thomas took the message of the letter to heart. He and Evelyn continued to work, but now they had a clearer vision of what they needed to do. The farm was no longer just a place to live. It was a place to heal, a place to offer refuge to those who needed it most. Word spread through the town, and soon, more people came, not just for the work, but for the healing that had taken root in the soil. They came to find peace, to rebuild their lives, and to share in the hope that had been rekindled. And so, Thomas, Evelyn, and Max continued to work, side by side, helping others find the same peace and purpose that they had found. The land, once forgotten and abandoned, had become a symbol of hope, a place where lives could be restored, and where the legacy of love and healing would live on for generations to come. The days continued to pass, and with each one, the sense of purpose and peace on the farm grew stronger. Thomas, Evelyn, and Max had become the heart of the community. The farm was no longer just a place to live. It was a place where people came together, healed, and found new hope. But as the farm flourished, there were still those who needed more than just a place to stay. The community had grown, and with it, so had the challenges. Thomas knew that their work was far from finished. There were still people who needed help, people who had nowhere else to turn. It was a responsibility he took to heart, and he knew that Evelyn felt the same way. Together, they had built something incredible, but there was more to do. One evening, as the sun set over the farm, casting a warm golden light across the fields, Thomas sat on the porch, deep in thought. The letter he had found months ago still weighed heavily on his mind. The message had been clear. There was a greater purpose to what they were doing, a legacy to continue. But what did that really mean? How far could they go? He wasn't sure, but he knew they had to try. Evelyn came out to join him, a steaming mug of tea in her hands. She handed it to him and sat down beside him, her eyes reflecting the same quiet determination that he felt. "I've been thinking," Thomas said, looking out at the land they had transformed. "We've done a lot, but there's still so much to be done. There are more people who need us." Evelyn nodded, her expression soft but resolute. "I know," she replied quietly, "but we can only do so much. We have to be careful not to spread ourselves too thin." Thomas smiled faintly, knowing she was right. They couldn't save everyone, but they could do their best to help those who came to them. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being there when people needed them most. The next morning, they held a community meeting in the barn. People from the town gathered, some familiar faces, others new. As the meeting began, Evelyn stood up to speak, her voice calm, but full of conviction. "We've come a long way since the day Thomas and Max arrived here," she said, glancing at Thomas, who stood beside her. "But this farm is not just ours. It belongs to all of us, and together, we can make it even better. We have a chance to create something special here, a place where everyone can find peace and healing. But we need to be open to new ideas. We need to think bigger." Thomas could feel the weight of her words, and he knew they were speaking to the heart of what they had all built. The farm wasn't just a sanctuary for those in need. It was a place where people could come together and make a real difference. As the meeting continued, ideas flowed freely. Some wanted to start a market, selling fresh produce grown on the land. Others suggested building more homes for those who had nowhere else to go. There were talks of offering workshops, counseling, and support for people struggling with their own battles. The possibilities seemed endless. But amid all the excitement, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. The work they were doing was important, but it wasn't enough to just help a few people. They needed to find a way to reach more. The idea of creating a network of support, a system that could help people long after they left the farm, began to take shape. It was a dream, but it felt like something they could accomplish if they worked together. And so, with the help of the community, Thomas and Evelyn set out to expand the reach of their mission. They began by opening the farm to more visitors, offering respite for people dealing with the stresses of everyday life. They created workshops for people to learn skills they could take back to their communities, helping them rebuild their own lives. The farm, once a quiet sanctuary, had become a beacon of hope for people all across the region. As the months went by, word of the farm's success spread far and wide. More people came, not just for the farm, but for the opportunity to be a part of something larger than themselves. And as the community grew, so did their efforts. Together, they built more homes, started more programs, and began to see the fruits of their labor. Lives transformed, hearts healed, and communities strengthened. One day, as Thomas stood at the edge of the farm, looking out at the land, he felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. The legacy that Evelyn's husband had spoken of was alive and well. They had built something truly special. But Thomas knew that it wasn't just the land or the buildings that had made the difference. It was the people. It was the love, the dedication, and the willingness to help one another that had made the farm the place it was. And in that moment, Thomas realized that their work was far from over. There would always be more to do, more lives to touch, more hearts to heal. But as long as they had each other and the community they had built, they would continue to carry the legacy forward, one day at a time. As the seasons changed, the farm continued to thrive. The once barren land now stood as a testament to the power of perseverance, love, and community. But with success came new challenges. The farm had become a beacon of hope, a place where people came not only to find healing, but to contribute to something much larger than themselves. It was no longer just about the land. It was about creating a legacy that would live on. Long after the work was done, Thomas, Evelyn, and Max had seen the impact they were having, but they also recognized that they needed to do more. The farm had become a sanctuary for the broken, a place where people could come and rebuild their lives, but the world beyond the farm was still struggling. Thomas knew that the work they had started couldn't be contained within the borders of the farm. The impact had to extend further. One evening, as the sun set and the orange glow filled the sky, Thomas and Evelyn sat on the porch, looking out over the land. Their hard work was paying off. There was no denying that. The community was stronger than ever, and lives were being transformed. But as Thomas sat there with Evelyn, he couldn't help but feel like there was still more they could do. He turned to Evelyn, his mind racing with ideas. "Evelyn," he said softly, "we've built something incredible here, but we can't stop now. There's so much more that needs to be done. This farm, this community, it can be just the beginning. We have a chance to help even more people." Evelyn nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know, Thomas. I've been thinking the same thing. This farm has become a place of healing, but it could be more. We could create a network, a support system that reaches beyond these walls. We could build a foundation that extends into the wider world, offering hope to those who need it most." The idea struck Thomas like a bolt of lightning. It was the next step, the next phase of the journey. The farm had already transformed lives, but now, they could create something that would provide long-term support. They would help people not just while they were on the farm, but after they left, giving them the tools they needed to continue their journey of healing and rebuilding. The next morning, they gathered the community together to share their idea. Word of the farm's success had spread far and wide, and more people had begun to take notice. The barn was filled with familiar faces and some new ones, eager to contribute their time, their energy, and their ideas. Thomas stood in front of the group, his heart full of gratitude for the people who had supported them every step of the way. "We've done something incredible here," he began, his voice steady and full of conviction. But now, it's time to take it to the next level. We can't just help people while they're here. We need to create a way to support them once they leave. We want to build a network, a foundation that offers continued support, no matter where they go. We need your help. The room buzzed with excitement as the community rallied behind the idea. People were eager to contribute, to become part of something bigger than themselves. Together, they brainstormed ways to make this vision a reality, creating a system that would provide financial assistance, mental health support, job training, and resources for people as they left the farm and re-entered the world. It wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about creating a ripple effect, spreading the hope and healing that had been cultivated there to every corner of the world. The following weeks were spent organizing, fundraising, and building the foundation that would allow the farm's impact to reach even further. Thomas and Evelyn worked tirelessly, but this time, they weren't alone. The community rallied together, each person contributing their unique skills and talents. The network began to take shape, slowly but surely. The idea that had started as a dream was becoming a reality. As the foundation grew, Thomas felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had experienced before. He wasn't just working for the farm anymore. He was working for something that could change the world. And the people who had once walked through the farm's gates looking for healing were now walking out with the tools they needed to succeed. One afternoon, as Thomas sat in the community center, going over plans for the foundation, a familiar face walked in. It was a man he hadn't seen in months, one of the first people who had arrived at the farm seeking help. His name was Michael, and when he had first arrived, he had been broken, lost in his own struggles, with nowhere to turn. But now, as he walked in, his face was filled with a sense of purpose. "Thomas," he said, his voice full of gratitude, "I just wanted to thank you. I don't think I would have made it without this place. I've got a job now, and I'm working on getting my own place. I've been clean for 6 months. Thomas stood up, his heart swelling with pride. "I'm proud of you, Michael. You did the work. We just gave you the tools." Michael smiled, his eyes bright with hope. "No, Thomas. You gave me more than that. You gave me a second chance." And in that moment, Thomas realized that the farm, the foundation, the community, they were all part of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The work they had done had created a ripple effect, one that had touched more lives than they could have ever anticipated. The legacy they had built was alive, growing, and changing the world, one person at a time. The months rolled by, and the farm's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. What had started as a small sanctuary for a few individuals had become a thriving community, a beacon of hope for many who had nowhere else to turn. The foundation they had built together, Thomas, Evelyn, and everyone who had contributed, had grown beyond their expectations. The ripple effect of their hard work was now touching the lives of people far and wide. What they had created was more than just a farm. It was a movement, one that spread the message that healing, hope, and second chances were possible for anyone willing to embrace them. But with success came its own set of challenges. As the network expanded, Thomas found himself increasingly overwhelmed by the responsibility of it all. The foundation had grown larger than he had ever imagined, and while that was a good thing, it also meant more decisions, more people to manage, and more expectations to meet. Despite the progress, there were still moments when doubt crept in. Could they really continue this momentum? Could the farm's success be replicated in other places? Would it last? One night, after a long day of meetings and planning, Thomas sat alone on the porch, the cool night air filling his lungs as he stared out over the fields. Max, his ever-loyal dog, sat by his side, his head resting on Thomas's knee. It had been years since that first day when Thomas had arrived at the farm, unsure of what the future held. Now, as he looked out over the land they had rebuilt, he realized how far they had come. But there was still so much to be done. "You know, Max," Thomas said softly, his voice a mix of exhaustion and resolve, "I never thought I'd get to this point. Sometimes it feels like it's all happening so fast. But I think we're making a real difference. I just hope we can keep it going." Max wagged his tail, as if to reassure him, and Thomas chuckled softly. He knew the dog couldn't understand his words, but in moments like these, Max's presence was more than enough. The next morning, as the sun rose over the land, Thomas met with Evelyn in the barn. They had a lot to discuss: new plans for the foundation, new ideas for outreach, and, most importantly, how to ensure that the farm's success wasn't just a temporary thing, but a lasting change. I've been thinking, Evelyn began, her voice steady as always. Maybe it's time to expand the scope of what we're doing. We've helped so many people already, but what if we could take this beyond our community? What if we could help even more people across the country? Thomas listened carefully, his mind turning over the possibilities. You mean start something bigger? He asked. A national initiative? Evelyn nodded. Exactly. There's so much need out there. And the work we've done here is just the beginning. We've built something good, Thomas, and now it's time to take the next step. The idea of expanding their reach beyond the farm was a daunting one, but Thomas couldn't deny the excitement that surged in him. He had spent so much of his life wondering if he could make a difference, and now, with the help of Evelyn and the community, he had found his purpose. They weren't just helping people temporarily. They were giving them the tools they needed to rebuild their lives for good. I think you're right, Thomas said after a pause, a new sense of determination in his voice. It's time to take this further. We've seen what's possible here. We can do this. And so, the next phase of their journey began. They worked tirelessly to develop the infrastructure necessary to expand the farm's model. They partnered with other communities, shared their success stories, and reached out to those who were in desperate need of the support they had built. It wasn't easy. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and challenges they hadn't anticipated. But with every obstacle they faced, the community grew stronger. People from all walks of life joined in to help, drawn to the vision of a place where hope could thrive. Over time, the impact of their work was undeniable. The farm's network expanded into neighboring towns, then across the state, and eventually to other parts of the country. More farms were established, each one modeled after the original sanctuary, but tailored to meet the specific needs of their communities. And with each new farm, the cycle of healing continued. Lives were transformed, and the ripple effect spread even further. It was a slow process, but it was steady. And with each success, Thomas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just helping people rebuild their lives anymore. He was helping to build a movement. One day, as he stood overlooking the fields with Evelyn by his side, Thomas couldn't help but smile. The journey they had started together had taken them farther than he had ever imagined. And while there was still much work to be done, he knew one thing for certain. They had created something that would last. The legacy of the farm was no longer just about the land or the buildings. It was about the people. It was about the lives they had touched, the communities they had helped rebuild, and the hope they had given to those who needed it most. Together, they had built something that would live on for generations. And as Thomas looked out over the land, he knew they had only just begun. As the months passed, the farm's expansion into neighboring communities continued to grow, its impact undeniable. Thomas and Evelyn watched as the model they had created spread further across the country, reaching the places where people had long been forgotten, the places where hope had seemed out of reach. Each new farm they established became a beacon of healing, and with every person who walked through their gates, the foundation of their mission was reinforced. Yet, despite the growing success, Thomas often found himself wrestling with a feeling he hadn't expected, a sense of unease. The farm had become everything he had hoped for, but with that success came a weight he had never imagined. It was no longer just about helping people in the present. It was about ensuring the future of what they had built. The responsibility to keep the vision alive was growing heavier every day. One evening, after a long day of meetings and planning, Thomas stood outside, looking out at the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon. Max, his loyal German shepherd, sat by his side, his presence as comforting as ever. Evelyn joined him, and for a moment, the two of them stood in silence, simply taking in the view. "We've come so far," Evelyn said quietly, breaking the silence. "But there's still so much left to do." Thomas nodded, his heart heavy with the same thoughts. "I know. The farm has become so much more than I ever imagined. But I can't help but wonder if we're doing enough, if we're making a big enough difference." Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "You've already made more of a difference than most could dream of, Thomas. Look at what we've built together. This farm, this network, it's changing lives. But it's okay to feel uncertain sometimes. That's just part of the journey." The weight of her words settled over him, and for the first time in a long while, Thomas allowed himself to feel a sense of relief. He had been pushing himself so hard, trying to ensure the future of everything they had built, that he had forgotten to simply appreciate the progress they had made. As the days went on, the farm continued to flourish. More families found solace in the community they had created. People came to the farm not just to escape their struggles, but to rebuild, to heal, and to find new purpose in their lives. The foundation was now established as a resource for communities all over the country, offering education, job training, mental health support, and a sense of belonging to those who had nowhere else to turn. But even as the farm's success continued to grow, Evelyn and Thomas both knew they needed to ensure its sustainability. It wasn't enough to simply create a place of refuge. They needed to ensure that the work they were doing would outlast them, that the foundation would continue long after they were gone. They began to focus on ways to create long-term solutions, to ensure that the farm's mission would carry on for generations. They developed partnerships with local businesses, educational institutions, and nonprofit organizations to create a network of support that could withstand the test of time. One evening, as the community gathered for a celebration of the farm's success, Thomas looked out over the crowd. The barn was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of voices coming together in unity. He watched as people from all walks of life shared stories, celebrated their successes, and supported each other in ways that only a community built on love and trust could. Evelyn stood beside him, her eyes shining with pride. "We've done it," she said, her voice full of emotion. "We've built something that will last. This place, this community, will continue to grow and thrive. It's bigger than us now." Thomas looked at her, his heart full. "We couldn't have done it without you, Evelyn. You've been the heart of all of this. I don't think I would have made it without you by my side." Evelyn smiled softly. "We've both done this together. This farm, this community, it's not just about one person. It's about everyone who's been a part of it. And that's what makes it so special." As the night went on, Thomas felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The work was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. He had spent so many years searching for his place in the world, for a reason to keep going, and now, standing here, surrounded by the people whose lives had been changed, he realized that he had finally found it. He had found his purpose. The farm wasn't just a place, it was a movement, one that was changing lives, one person at a time. And as he stood beside Evelyn, watching the community they had built come together, Thomas knew that they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. It was a legacy, a living testament to the power of hope, love, and second chances. And that, more than anything, was the greatest gift they could have given the world. The months that followed brought new challenges, but also incredible opportunities. The network of farms had grown beyond what Thomas and Evelyn had ever imagined, reaching more and more communities and touching more lives. However, with this expansion came growing pains. The systems they had put in place to support the farm and its mission had to be adjusted to accommodate the larger scope. It was no longer just a small, local project. It was becoming a movement, one that was influencing the country in ways they had never thought possible. As the work continued, Thomas found himself reflecting on how much had changed since he first arrived on the farm. The man who had stepped onto the land, tired, broken, and unsure of his purpose, was now standing at the helm of something much greater than himself. The farm had become a place where people could rebuild their lives, and the foundation they had created was becoming a model for other communities. But the weight of responsibility began to settle on Thomas's shoulders. There were more people to manage, more programs to run, and more expectations to meet. The work had become all-consuming, and Thomas couldn't help but feel like he was losing touch with the reason he had started this journey in the first place. He spent more time in meetings, more time with spreadsheets, and less time with the people he had set out to help. It was becoming harder to connect with the heart of the mission, the individuals who had come to the farm seeking refuge, healing, and a second chance. Evelyn noticed the change in him. She saw the way he withdrew, the weight of his responsibilities pulling him away from the very people he cared about. She knew that something had to be done before it was too late. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of planning and decision-making, Evelyn sat down next to Thomas on the porch, the same place where they had shared so many quiet moments over the years. She handed him a cup of tea, her eyes filled with concern. "Thomas," she said softly, "I've been watching you. You've been carrying so much on your shoulders, and I can see how it's taking its toll. You've given so much to this farm, to this community, but you can't do it all alone. Thomas sighed, rubbing his temples as he sat back in his chair. I know. I just feel like there's so much more to be done, and I want to make sure it all works. I want to keep it going, keep it growing. But I'm starting to feel like I'm losing touch with the people who need us the most. Evelyn reached over and took his hand, her voice steady and full of love. You don't have to carry this alone, Thomas. You've built something incredible here, but you're not the only one who can make it work. You've surrounded yourself with people who care, people who are just as committed to this mission as you are. It's time to trust them, to let them help carry the load. You can't do everything, and you don't have to. You've given your heart and soul to this place. Now, it's time to let others step up. Thomas looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed that he needed to do it all himself, that if he didn't, the vision he had for the farm might fall apart. But as he looked at Evelyn, he realized that he had built something much bigger than just himself. He had created a community of people who shared his vision, who were ready to carry it forward. You're right, he said, his voice filled with relief. I've been so focused on making everything work that I've forgotten what really matters. This farm, this community, it's about people coming together. It's not just about me. From that moment on, Thomas made a conscious effort to step back, to delegate, and to trust the people around him. He worked closely with the team that had been formed, a group of individuals who shared his vision and who were passionate about the mission. He began to focus more on what he had always loved about the work, the personal connections, the healing, and the transformation of lives. Evelyn took on more responsibility as well, helping to oversee the daily operations and ensuring that everything ran smoothly. Together, they worked to refine their systems and processes, but always keeping the heart of the mission at the center. As the farm continued to expand, they brought in more leaders from other communities, people who had been impacted by the work and who wanted to give back. These new leaders helped to create a network of support that could stand on its own, one that didn't rely solely on Thomas and Evelyn. The more they built, the more sustainable the foundation became. Slowly but surely, the movement they had started began to take on a life of its own. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, watching the community gather for another celebration, Thomas turned to Evelyn. You were right, he said, a smile tugging at his lips. I couldn't have done this without you. And I definitely couldn't have done it without the help of everyone who's been here from the beginning. It's not about me anymore. It's about all of us. Evelyn smiled, her eyes full of warmth. It always has been, Thomas. It always has been. The farm was no longer just a place for people to rebuild. It had become a place where people came to give back, to create change, and to carry the torch forward. And in that moment, Thomas realized that the true legacy of what they had built wasn't just about creating a safe place for healing. It was about creating a community that would continue to thrive long after they were gone. With every person who walked through the gates, the movement grew stronger. The work was far from finished, but Thomas knew that the farm was no longer dependent on him. It was a living, breathing testament to the power of community, hope, and second chances. As the farm's legacy continued to flourish, Thomas and Evelyn found themselves at a crossroads. The foundation they had built was strong, but they both knew that with success came an even greater responsibility. The movement they had started had expanded well beyond their expectations, reaching more communities, transforming more lives, and creating a ripple effect that was still spreading. But now, the question loomed. How could they ensure that this momentum would continue, that the work they had started would endure for generations to come? Thomas spent many long nights thinking about this, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders once more. The farm had become a model of healing, of second chances, but what would happen when he and Evelyn were no longer able to lead? They had built something powerful, but now they had to prepare it to stand on its own. He looked out over the land, the fields that had once been barren now teeming with life, the barn that had once been a modest shelter now bustling with activity, and the faces of the people who had come to the farm seeking hope and healing. This was no longer just about them. It was about the future. We need to make sure this lasts, Thomas said one evening, as he and Evelyn sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land. We've created something incredible, but we can't let it fade away. We have to find a way to pass it on, to make sure the next generation can carry this forward. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully, her eyes filled with both pride and concern. I know. We've built something that's bigger than just us, and now it's time to think about how to pass on the torch. But it's not just about leadership. It's about making sure the mission and the values we've instilled here continue. We need to build a structure that can support it, even when we're no longer around to guide it. The conversation was a turning point for both of them. For years, they had focused on building the farm, transforming it into a place of refuge and healing. But now, they had to think beyond the present and ensure its sustainability. They couldn't do it alone anymore. They needed to build a team of leaders who would carry the mission forward. The next few months were spent in deep reflection and planning. Thomas and Evelyn began to meet with members of the community who had shown leadership and passion for the work they had done. They discussed creating a new structure, one that would empower the people who had been part of the farm's success to take on more responsibility. They wanted to ensure that the farm could run smoothly without relying entirely on their guidance. As they began to outline the future, the idea of a leadership council took shape. A group of dedicated individuals who would help manage the day-to-day operations, make key decisions, and continue to uphold the values of compassion, healing, and hope that had always been at the core of the farm's mission. It was a daunting task, but it felt right. They weren't stepping away from the work. They were creating a system that would allow the farm to thrive even after they were gone. As the council was formed, Thomas and Evelyn took on a mentoring role, guiding the new leaders, offering advice, and sharing their vision for the future. They were still involved, but now their role was to ensure that the next generation of leaders was prepared to take the reins. Over time, the leadership council began to take shape. It was made up of individuals who had come to the farm seeking help, but who had since found their own strength and purpose. They had been transformed by the very mission they were now entrusted to continue. There was Maria, a former teacher who had come to the farm after losing her job and her sense of direction. She had found solace in the community and had gone on to help develop the farm's education programs. Then there was Carl, a veteran who had struggled with PTSD before finding peace at the farm. He had since become a counselor, helping others who were facing similar battles. And there was Sarah, a young mother who had come to the farm looking for a fresh start after escaping an abusive relationship. She had found strength and support, and now she was working to help other women in need. These individuals, along with others, became the core of the Leadership Council. They were the ones who would carry the farm's mission forward, ensuring that it continued to provide hope and healing to those who needed it most. As the new leadership took hold, Thomas and Evelyn began to feel a sense of peace. The farm was no longer just their vision. It was the vision of the entire community. They had created something that would continue to grow, something that was bigger than themselves. They were still there, still guiding the farm with their experience and wisdom, but they were no longer the sole driving force. The farm was now a living, breathing entity, one that was sustained by the people who believed in it, who had invested their hearts and souls into it. One afternoon, as Thomas and Evelyn stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the land that had transformed so dramatically, they both felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The work wasn't finished, but it no longer felt as though it all rested on their shoulders. They had done what they set out to do. They had created a place where people could find hope, heal, and rebuild their lives. And now, it was time for the next chapter. The legacy they had started was alive and well, and it was ready to continue, driven by the people who had become a part of it. As they turned to leave the fields behind, Thomas looked at Evelyn, his heart full. "We've done it," he said quietly. "It's going to last." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "Yes, Thomas, it will last. We've built something that will never fade away." As time passed, the farm continued to grow, its influence spreading further into the hearts of the people it touched. The Leadership Council, now well established, carried forward the mission with a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a single, humble farm had blossomed into a national movement, a place where people came not just to rebuild their lives, but to contribute to something larger than themselves. Thomas and Evelyn watched with pride as their dream continued to take shape, knowing that the foundation was in capable hands. The hard work they had put into the farm and the community had paid off, and it was now thriving, with new farms and sanctuaries sprouting up in other towns, each one following the model that had been created. The work was no longer just about survival, but about growth, hope, and lasting change. One afternoon, as Thomas and Evelyn sat together in the community center, looking out at the land that had become so much more than they had ever imagined, Thomas spoke with a quiet sense of fulfillment. "Evelyn, do you remember when we first started? When we had no idea how far this would go?" Evelyn smiled, her eyes filled with the warmth of shared memories. "I remember. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew we had to try. And look at us now. It's bigger than anything I ever dreamed." Thomas looked out over the community that had come together. He saw people working in the fields, some planting new crops, others caring for the animals, and some just sitting together, talking and sharing their stories. The farm was no longer just a place for healing. It had become a thriving, vibrant community. "We've created something special here," he said. "Not just a farm, but a place where people find each other, find hope, and find themselves again. I never imagined that it would be like this." Evelyn nodded. "Neither did I. But it feels right, Thomas. This is what we were meant to do. We've given people the chance to rebuild, but more than that, we've given them a place to belong." As the years passed, the impact of the farm's work reached even further. People came not just to work, but to learn, to teach, and to share the knowledge and skills that had helped them heal. Workshops and programs were held regularly, covering everything from sustainable farming to emotional healing, job training, and leadership. The farm had become a place of education, a place of growth in every sense of the word. But perhaps the greatest impact was seen in the lives of the people who had come to the farm in search of solace. They were now the ones who were helping others, passing on the lessons they had learned and guiding the next generation. The cycle of healing and giving back had come full circle. One day, as Thomas and Evelyn walked through the fields, looking at the farm that had become their life's work, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. "You know," he said quietly, "I've thought a lot about what this all means. And I think I've finally figured it out. It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about giving people the tools they need to heal themselves, and then helping them find the strength to help others." Evelyn smiled, taking his hand. "Exactly. We've created something that will continue to grow, something that's bigger than both of us. And that's the most beautiful thing we could have ever done." As they continued to walk, they passed by the new homes that had been built, the orchards that had flourished, and the community center that had become the heart of it all. The people who had once come to the farm broken and alone were now part of something vibrant, something alive. The farm wasn't just a place anymore. It was a movement. It was a legacy that would continue long after Thomas and Evelyn were gone. It was a living testament to the power of hope, the strength of community, and the ability of individuals to rebuild their lives when given the chance. And as they walked side by side, Thomas knew that this was the culmination of everything they had worked for. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every step. The farm had become what they had dreamed of, a place where people could come to heal, to grow, and to find new purpose. And as the sun set over the fields, casting a golden glow over everything they had built, Thomas and Evelyn knew that they had created something that would live on forever. A place of hope, a place of second chances, a place where love and healing would always thrive. Discover the powerful journey of a homeless veteran and his loyal dog, as they transform a broken farm into a thriving community of hope and healing. In this inspiring story, explore the struggles and triumphs of rebuilding lives, where the legacy of veteran stories is passed down to future generations. Follow their path as they create a sanctuary that helps people from all walks of life find new purpose. Witness the impact of one man's determination to make a difference in the world, guided by the principles of strength, compassion, and redemption. As more veteran stories unfold, we see how a single act of kindness and support can change lives forever. The community they built is a shining example of what is possible when people come together with a shared mission of healing. These veteran stories are not just about surviving. They are about thriving, rebuilding, and making the world a better place. Join us as we explore the depth of these moving veteran stories and learn how hope and perseverance can lead to a lasting legacy. This is not just a story of one man's journey. It is a collection of veteran stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the power of second chances.